inbuilt categories of linguistics in the mind. So in exactly the same way as he's expressed that architecture, that mental architecture, so the principles of the zodiac, the mathematical underlying architecture, the 7, the 12, the 3, and the 4, and so on, that is in our psyche. And it's only because of the incredible misrepresentation of astrology by these so-called astrologers who haven't the faintest idea about the origins of their own subject matter. And it's also because of the egregious, backlashing, or whatever you want to call it, criticism from the sort of materialist atheist crony, crowd who want to deny that there's any spiritual dimension to humankind. Astrology as a pure science has suffered a lot. But when you understand that it is based on a projection of human consciousness, then you'll start to understand more about what goes on. The zodiac, whether you're talking about the great ages, the processional ages, or you're talking about the yearly zodiac, these are just simply projections of human consciousness. So I always encourage my audience to, go and study up on that so they get more clear on when I even myself make, slip and talk about Uranus or Pluto or Venus or Sun. I always try to, caveat that by saying that, look, I don't actually mean some planet in space necessarily. I'm speaking about an archetypal force. Yeah, like a more of a spiritual, sort of a psycho physical force. It's just a means of communication, like music. The zodiac works on very similar principles as the way that musical notes communicate to us. I mean, there's a reason why people like to listen to Stairway to Heaven or a piece of Chopin. That stuff is speaking to us. Well, the zodiacal archetypes, any symbolism, in fact, whether it's alchemical, mathematical, color, for instance, the miracle of color, we could have 5 shows on just that. So we're being spoken to all the time. Remember, you were speaking earlier about you and the number 42 and how you were playing with that and wondering what the significance is. You see, that number, it's not the number that's the problem really there. It's what that number symbolizes in many ways. The factors that make it up, the relationship between this number 4 and the number 2, because there's really 2 numbers there, right? You said 42, but that actually implies there's 2 numbers there, 4 and 2. And those numbers got a lot of different spiritual, esoteric relationships. But to cut it short, what I mean is that numbers, be it 1 to 10, they are themselves meaningless. Like I said, those are just things that exist. What exists behind them is frequency, energy. And those are archetypes. So the numbers are really messengers of a certain vibration. They're conveying a certain vibration. For instance, the number 4 basically conveys the vibration of order, structure, and practicality. So each number represents a particular frequency. That can be universalized, like in most numerology, we'd say those numbers go for everybody, and that's fine and dandy. But ultimately, each individual has a personal relationship with those numbers as well. When one would get into it and study it and come to their own relationship, some people, for instance, I'll give you one example of the number 4, mandalas. When Carl Jung famously had these clients who went through, well, it wasn't even really major breakthroughs. It was almost like just the first stage of the breakthroughs that they had. Something led them to express themselves by painting mandalas. As you know, mandalas are made of 4, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of them are the square symbolism. And so what is that? Well, Nietzsche would have come along and said, well, I'll tell you what that is. That is a man's aesthetic response. Because man is primarily an aesthetic creature. Long before he uses his reason, long before he even becomes aware that there's a mathematical order to the universe, long before any of that left brain stuff, every man, including every child, is turned on initially by the simple beauty of what's around him. In fact, Nietzsche took this to the extent, anyone who wants to know Nietzsche has to understand that the aesthetic appreciation and aesthetic creations like music and art, actually going and doing it, writing poetry, this was the center of his philosophy, and many others have swore by this as well, that they claim that the whole meaning of life is based on this aesthetic appreciation. But without even getting into any of that, just the very fact that nature was so intoxicatingly beautiful to look at, even thunderstorms or lightning or the sunrise or whatever it might be, the miracle of the flow of river, a river and whatever, This made man wonder, wow, how did this all come into being? And so they saw that man's original state of consciousness was just this completely spontaneous response to beauty, right? And we still have it today. And in fact, I mean, we know this because you can look down through all of history, and all the people that we admire, including the Leonardo da Vinci's, were artists before they were geometrists or scientists. They were the greatest minds in the world, were often scientifically inclined, but they were also extremely artistic. I mean, half the buildings we live in, half the state buildings of the world, based on that Romanesque design, for instance, were designed not just by people who had brilliant mathematical skills and geometric skills, but were also incredibly inspired artistically, like Vitruvius and Pacioli and all of these other guys you see. Same thing in music. So yeah, music is mathematical to the extent that you got to know the notes and you got to know the, you know, writing aspect of music. But long before that, and even at the end of it, it's more about the beautiful aspect of it. You see, so half the stuff that we do in the world, or more of it, is motivated by this aesthetic sense. And therefore, that's important as well to bear in mind that we have this innately within ourselves. And when you're responding then to those numbers just represent, in geometrical form, they may represent some sort of geometry, or they may represent some sort of Archimedean geometry, you know, like the Platonic solids and what have you. A lot of people, when they see numbers like 333 and 777 and 888 and 222, there's a lot of triad numbers appear for people. I think you mentioned even yourself earlier on 1111.
Yeah.
Was that you that mentioned that?
It is. It's a friend of mine. He's convinced that the coincidence of 1111, seeing it in not only in he sees like a double L in his last name and the last name of his girlfriend, and he sees symbolism in that being 1111.
Understood.
In addresses, in times that things happen when he's thinking of certain things, and mile markers on driving on the highway.
Well, this is a language that when you're coming to it from this left brain point of view, it seems very strange, and a lot of people can think you're kind of crazy. But what's actually happening is that slowly the natural intelligence that we've been alluding to before, or if you want to say right brain or this aesthetic sense or whatever it might be, that's awakening. And we stop it. We get freaked out by it, and when we stop doing it. And therefore, like right now on the clock, as I'm looking, where I'm in Europe, it says 3:14. That's pi.
Right. Yeah.
So now, how significant is pi? It's so significant. We just happen now to be talking about sacred geometry and numerology and the mystical aspects of a number, and I'm looking at the clock, and it's 3:14 exactly. The left brain goes, complete coincidence, has no meaning. But who's to say to me it has no meaning? I decide whether it has meaning or not. You see, as we said earlier, it connects to that thing about bringing meaning out from yourself. Exactly. So this natural organic flow, yeah. So these numbers, now say your friend went and started to discover about the Platonic solids, the dodecahedron, the cube octahedron, the tetrahedron, right? Mm-hmm. Which happen to be based on the cellular structure of the body, you know, and there's so many other authors who have gone into this far more deeply than I've done, people like Drunvalo Melchizedek and even Greg Braden to a certain extent. There's many books out on this subject. You will start to find that the dimensions of these Platonic solids, there's 5 Platonic solids and 18 Archimedean solids, and those, by the way, are in the universe. Those just embody the very essence of the architecture of the universe, right? You will start to discover that these very numbers that you keep noticing, or some part of your brain is attracted to, turn out to be the numbers that are the numbers of these vertices and the numbers of the sides and the dimensions of these particular objects, these solids, or even the body human itself, the human body's dimensions itself from a Pythagorean Fibonacci point of view. And you have the Fibonacci series, you've got many other spiritual esoteric series that are inherent in the natural order. There's the ones that you know about, and then there's the ones they don't want you to know about. So there's all of these spiritual numerology that's encoded into the Sphinx, that's encoded into the pyramid, that's encoded into the human body, and so forth and so on. There's so many, books I could refer to people who are, if they're fascinated by this. I've gone into it at great length in my own work. And so these dimensions are those living archetypes. But the thing that those numbers are the bridge between you, right, your microcosmic understanding, your microcosmic intelligence, and the apparently external macrocosmic world. You're related to that. The world is made out of the same stuff as your consciousness is made out of. It's completely psychophysical, psychosomatic. And therefore, those numbers, in one sense, are the language of the exchange of the energy between your psyche and the physical world. And we have moved only from a left brain point of view, where the only numbers we care about are the numbers of, money, and we've reduced it down to such a boring, banal level, 1, 2, 3, 4, like they're dead things. It no longer has an esoteric or spiritual component to it. Yet in ancient days, which we record in our minds, right, our consciousness is the culmination of millennia of experience. Well, that ancient ancestral voice, it knows what the number 2 or the number 3 or the number 22, number 44, whatever, represents. And we've shut that off, unfortunately. So it's very, very important in spiritual development to reopen it again.
Right. How do you suggest we do that, really? How do we open that back up?
Studying sacred geometry, studying numerology. My mystery school, the Time Gnosis, we have people working with these numbers on a very practical level, so that hopefully will be the starting ground for them to then go on to use double-digit numbers and so on and so forth. And getting into the tarot, all of the tarot cards have numbers, and they have deeply esoteric meanings. All the divination arts, that's extremely important to get involved with that if you're interested in what you're asking. Sacred geometry is part of it as well. And I would say even studying these solids, like I spoke about, the geometrical solids, the Archimedean, 18 Archimedean forms, and the 5 Platonic solids, and their dimensions and their vertices and the relationships between each other, like how many planes do they have, how many vertices do they have. This is what fascinated the ancients who built the pyramid. Half the ziggurats and pyramids are based on very precise geometry of 618, that's the phi ratio and what have you, and many other numbers I could mention, you see. The number 66 appears a lot. The Bible is loaded with it.
Do you think speaking of the pyramid, do you think the pyramids were built by, does your research show, have you found that the pyramids are built by human ancients alone?
I don't know. I think that I'm not even sure they're dated right, and I can tell you that
that's a Graham Hancock thing. Is he thinks they're way older.
Yeah, I've always maintained that. I think they were built way back in the precessional age of Virgo, if not even before that. But as to who built them, I think enlightened humans. This Atlantean knowledge. Because remember, it's not only in Egypt that you have these precisely designed.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere, including in Ireland as well. What did you say?
Some are even under the ocean.
Yes, the ones that Hancock has photographed. Exactly. So there's no doubt in my mind that there was a gigantic school of knowledge. That's why people I refer to as the Arya or the Druids or whatever. These were a worldwide organization, and they're known in Egypt as the Shamsu Hor, or disciples of Horus. And they're the ones who actually built the pyramid. But the knowledge that they brought with them was Atlantean. It was from the ancient days when lots more things were known about the planet Earth than we can ever imagine. And also the consciousness of people was pre-trauma. So we're talking about people who had a very high level of consciousness here and knew how to move these blocks. Now there's even some, in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been some individuals who've even learned to move these stones. But 20 years ago, there wasn't even a crane that could have lifted them. Now they've made some small effort to even show that they could have been physically maneuvered. So we're slowly making progress to realize that, yeah, it probably could have been done just with what we would describe as human beings, without necessarily believing any supernatural or off-world presence. But again, I'm open to all things, because those sarcophagi, and I don't just mean the ones in the pyramid, but the ones in Saqqara in the south. The top engineers in the world with the latest equipment, the latest measuring equipment, cannot work out to this day how the angles of the inside of these boxes, like the king's coffer.
Yeah.
And these other big, giant, what they call sarcophagi. It's just nobody can work out how those angles are so precise. They don't even have the tools to do it today, let alone to cut them and get them so precise. And then the utter travesty, when they come to date it, they pick up a piece of broken pottery from beside it, date that pottery, right? There could be some, piss pot that some guy put there, some old shepherd. Date that, and then say, oh, well, now we know how old the sarcophagus was. That now passes for academic, sort of like, science or whatever. Yeah, this is what they hand to you on the plate for hundreds of years.
Wow. Now, as far as this knowledge of the planet that is obviously